On this episode of Civic Cocktail, we analyze results from the midterm election.
People want a check on this president and this Congress.
I think you have a lot of conservative voters who got a lot more conservative and liberal voters who got a lot more liberal.
Both sides met. The Republican intensity looked almost as high as the Democratic for voting.
Revered in the Northwest and beloved for their sensitivity, what will save our resident orcas from extinction?
We know that if we can quiet the waters around them, they can find more food.
We have to take that bold action now.
It's all coming up on Civic Cocktail.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Civic Cocktail. I'm Joni Balter. Thanks for joining our deep dive into the midterm elections that featured two notable trends: a decisive Democratic takeover of the U.S. House, another with Republicans retaining firm control of the U.S. Senate. With us to sort it all out, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington's 7th District, Jason Rantz, morning host on AM 770, KTTH. He's a Republican, and Marco Lowe, Seattle University political science professor. That's not all. Journalists helping with the questions this evening: C.R. Douglas, political analyst for Q13, and Linda Mapes, environment reporter for the Seattle Times. Anybody relieved that the election is over? I'll say. So from each of you, I'd like to hear your sort of takeaway message. What do you think happened? How do you briefly describe the election that just happened, Congresswoman?
Well, first of all, thank you for re-electing me to the United States Congress. And I just can't tell you how happy I am to be in the majority. It's the first time I've been in the majority in my life, both in life and in politics. But here's the takeaway. This is the people's house we're talking about, the house that is closest to the people of the United States. And I think what we saw is an unbelievable number of women running, women voting, and women winning. So we will have the most number of women that we've ever seen in the United States House. I think it's over 110 women, but also an incredibly diverse representation of this country. Our first two Muslim American women, our first two Native American women, many more African American women. And this is important because I think the second takeaway is that people want a check on this president and this Congress. And they want to see some accountability, and they want to see a president who actually represents the country and not just a minority of the base. And so I think that was the message that was clearly sent. Obviously, we would have loved it if we had taken over the Senate as well, but we see already that we're going to be fast at work with the firing of Jeff Sessions in really making sure that we protect our Constitution and our democracy.
Jason Rantz.
So I think what we saw was history repeating itself. Generally speaking, when you have one party in power, they tend to lose some of that power because, the American people generally want to see a divided government because it does ensure some checks and balances. I think that's healthy for our democracy. I think you have a lot of conservative voters who got a lot more conservative and liberal voters who got a lot more liberal. And so the problem is you're going to have a little bit more of potential animosity between the two. And the question is whether or not we can actually bridge that divide a little bit more in a respectful way. I think that we saw the media overplay their hand a little bit in some of the coverage here, and that's why you have some people who are shocked.
Media is always good.
It's very good, but there are people who are shocked to see that Republicans increase their majority in the Senate, where that was a prediction a lot of us had on both sides, and we kind of expected that the House was going to go to the Democrats. So I'm not necessarily shocked by any of it, and the fact that people are shocked, that shocks me, I suppose.
Well, there you go. That's Marco.
I think expectations got really high, and people started to think we're going to take Georgia governorship, we're going to take Texas Senate. Both sides met. The Republican intensity looked almost as high as the Democratic for voting. The Democrats outperformed, I think, what you would think, but you'll see even more in 2020 potentially. But that the takeaway in many ways, after people felt a little bummed out, was yes, the House was taken back by the Democrats. Scott Walker lost in Wisconsin. A female Democratic governor of Kansas, which is a sentence, we're not in Kansas anymore. But even more so, like, Texas almost had a Democratic senator. And if that happened in California, the DNC would be melting down right now because you can't. I mean, the Republicans can't lose Texas and get the White House back. There's no math for that in the Electoral College. So I think the expectations weren't met, but there were a lot of outperforms for the Democrats last night as well.
Can I just add something to that? Because I think that's a really important point, because we were, of course, hoping that we would win certain places where we didn't win, but you can't forget that we made some of these places competitive that we never thought we could be competitive in. And we did it with bold progressive candidates. So Stacey Abrams got us oh so close, and it still has not been called in Georgia. Texas, Beto O'Rourke, and we elected 2 Latina Americans in Texas to Congress for the first time. So I think we are seeing some really remarkable trends that if the Republican Party decides that they want to double down on a divisive message that only, that marginalizes and demonizes immigrants and women and every other category, that they will have real problems, if not in 2020, then certainly going forward.
Jason Rantz, we're talking a lot about the turnout. How do you think there was a lot of turnout? We kept hearing, leading up to voting day, that there's just so many people waiting in line, so many people voting. How do you think the turnout manifested in the results?
The turnout was the turnout because of fear. And it was fear on both sides. It was fear coming from the Republican Party, and it was fear coming from the Democratic Party as well. When you take this position that you're very quick to call someone a fascist or say we're going to a Handmaid's Tale time in this country, that's going to freak a lot of people out, and I think that plays to the divide.
Or a migrant caravan.
And I think the migrant caravan was also overplayed. I think that there are cases to be made on both sides that you can have a reasonable conversation about immigration reform without demonizing immigrants in a caravan. But I also think simply talking about the immigration problem and talking about the caravan issue doesn't make you a bigot, doesn't automatically mean that you're a xenophobe. It doesn't mean that. We can have those conversations. I don't think the president always has the conversations in the right way, but I also don't think the Democrats have the conversation in the right way if we truly want to be less divided in this country.
Marco, was Donald Trump as a plus at play in the more rural congressional districts in our state, in the 3rd and the 5th?
I don't think he campaigned for either, to be honest with you.
They didn't invite him.
They didn't invite him.
And there was a method to that, I believe. But did he ultimately end up being a factor there?
I think more in the 5th. I mean, you do have very Democratic senators in Pullman and Spokane in the 5th district, which is Eastern Washington under Kathy McMorris Rodgers. I think he was probably more helpful there just in the intensity that he did bring to the race in the final weeks. I think his barnstorming did have some effect and positive for the GOP. I don't think he helped as much in the 3rd, and I think they're also realizing some of the redistricting in the 3rd that was supposed to make it a safer seat for the GOP may not be paying off as the Portland suburbs have moved north across the river.
Congresswoman, everybody is talking about waves and wavelets and all that kind of stuff. But there is, as you began to speak here this evening, there is a wave of women. And Kim Schreier in the 8th District is an example of some of that. And yes, the numbers of women are higher, but why is that like this sort of agreed upon good thing? I mean, I'm female, obviously, I get it, but why do the voters now think that women are somehow better in these positions?
Well, I think that there has long been research that shows that when women get into office, they are able to stand up for families more quickly. They're able to stand up for equal rights more quickly. It just is the lived experience of being a woman. But I think in this particular election, what we saw is suburban women starting to move left, rejecting the divisiveness that has been put out there by the Republican Party and saying, no, we actually don't believe all these things. And that's a very, very important constituency. The other constituency I think that was important is voters who were between the income levels of 50,000 to 100,000 really dramatically shifted left. That's across the country in rural areas as well as urban areas. And when you think about why that is, it's because they see that the economic benefits of this that were being touted by this president and this Republican Party weren't actually translating to them. That's an extremely important constituency. Look at the fact that minimum wage ballot initiatives passed in Missouri and Arkansas. Look at the fact that there was a cap on payday lending that passed in Colorado. Look at the fact that we literally saw Medicaid expansion on the ballot passing in Republican states. These are indications that the economy is not working for people and they want a government that is going to help actually lift up working Americans across the country, not just the wealthiest and the largest corporations.
But they're still voting for Republicans in those states, and I think that's an important point to make. I mean, when you look at these states, they're still voting for Republicans, which means they may like some of the ideas, and they're identifying with some of the strategies to push some of these ideas. And I think that, the shared experience argument, I think, is a valid one, because there are going to be a lot of people who have the experience of voting into something that's very expensive, and then starting to see some of those tax cuts that they absolutely did see. I think this is an untrue statement where we want to claim that most people aren't seeing additional funds in their bank accounts as a result of this policy.
Well, actually,
all
of the research, including from the Wall Street Journal, says that 82% of the benefits of the tax cuts went into stock buybacks. That does not help average working people. So I don't think we've seen that showing up in people's pocketbooks. And you see it on every level in terms of where people are actually spending money, where they're getting their jobs. So I think that that's been pretty much shown by the research. And you saw Republicans run far away from trying to run on the tax plan. They abandoned that.
I think that was
hang on. So Marco Lowe, I want to bring you in here, and I want to ask you how.
We're just going to have to do a separate show.
I would say that. We'll do that afterwards.
You're coming on my show this soon, right?
I am.
I'm used to being a third wheel.
How will a really?
Long, sad story.
How will the Democratic House, I'm going to get this question out, I swear, be any different? How will Washington, D.C. feel different?
Oh gosh, you have a huge brake check on the Trump administration. I mean, it's just such a different world when you don't have both legislative bodies and the presidency. So, I mean, even last night you saw we want to see the president's taxes, and you'll see investigations. You'll see a complete stop of the discussion of repeal of ACA and other factors. So yeah, it's a huge change, and negotiations will have to stop or government will freeze.
So Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, was fired, offered to resign, and all of that happened today. The U.S. House can't really do much about that, can they?
Well, the people certainly can. I think there are going to be rallies across the country tomorrow. I just want to, I don't think I can understate the seriousness of what just happened. When Jeff Sessions was fired, Donald Trump has then appointed the chief of staff, somebody, Mr. Whitaker, who has specifically written an op-ed that is critical of the Mueller investigation and advocates really limiting the Mueller investigation. So obstruction of justice in terms of really being able to complete the Mueller investigation and see what Robert Mueller has found is what we're talking about. And I think that it is an enormous problem. There are some legal issues in terms of the special counsel regulations that the Judiciary Committee is working on right now. We just have sent a letter, or are about to send a letter, saying that it would not be within the regulatory power to actually make Whitaker in charge of the special counsel's investigation because he has not been appointed by the Senate, and therefore he can't serve in that position. So you will see Democrats putting some of this forward, and hopefully on a bipartisan basis, just protecting the ability for Robert Mueller to finish his investigation and to get us the information so that we can determine what actually happened.
C.R. Douglas.
There was some lip service today by both the president and Nancy Pelosi about bipartisanship. There was some talk about, maybe a dreamer's deal, maybe an infrastructure package, maybe something on healthcare and prescription drug costs. How short-lived will that language be? I mean, we've heard it before and it hasn't materialized.
Yeah.
It's already.
Let's all of you, starting with you, Jason. Will we have bipartisanship or will we have gridlock?
You're not going to have bipartisanship, and I don't think anyone actually wants bipartisanship. I think that when you hear leadership on both sides say they want that, they're doing that because they think it's going to get some nice little coverage. You heard Nancy Pelosi make that case. Dick Durbin just yesterday said there's no any sort of ability to sit down with the president on immigration. So if you're already going into it saying that we're not going to come to a deal, you're not going to come to a deal. I think there is a game that's being played, and I think that they like this kind of division, both sides, because it gets their base really engaged in their races. Here's the deal. When it comes to the Senate, I mean, the Republican strategy here to pick up seats and really put their message out there to pick up in Missouri, to pick up in, and I call it a pickup hopefully in Arizona, because it's not Jeff Flake who's going to give some problems to the president. It's because this is about judges. that's what this is about. From a conservative perspective, if you're looking to help change some of the issues you have with the perception that a lot of judges are allowing bad laws because of ideology, you want a justice in place.
Pramila Jayapal, is your priority accountability or bipartisan packages?
We can eat and chew gum at the same time. You got to protect the Constitution, but absolutely we want to do anything we can in a bipartisan way. And I actually think there is an opportunity for that. I think there are a lot of us that really want to get some work done for the American people. Prescription drug pricing. I think that is something Donald Trump has said he cares about deeply. Democrats care about it deeply. We have talked about an infrastructure package, except then it became an infrastructure package of private sector money that privatizes roads. That's very different. So if we can do an infrastructure package that is a real investment of government dollars in jobs and infrastructure across the country, you will see Democratic takers. On the DREAM Act, I really have to take us back a little bit. The president rewound DACA when he didn't need to. He eliminated the DACA program. He said, Congress, you give me anything bipartisan and I will sign it. Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin took him a deal. In fact, they took him multiple deals. He could have had his border wall probably a long time ago with the deals that they took him. And he said no. And he stopped the Senate from moving forward on that. So,
but would you support that? Would you support a border wall along with saving DACA? Because
that wasn't the deal. You understand that?
I'm going to do the questioning here.
saying,
I'm going to do the questioning because I have too much to get to.
But I think the whole issue is that this president says he wants to do things. And then either because advisors are whispering in his ear, because I actually do think he wanted to do DACA before he got told by Stephen Miller not to do it, and John Kelly and others. But that's where he is now. So is he really going to put that forward? He's the one that signs the bills, remember. Okay. So we can propose, he can dispose, and let's see if he really wants bipartisanship.
So to you, Marco, I wanted to ask you, what are the odds of the Democrats overreaching and making life much easier for Donald Trump re-election in 2020?
I think it's really hard to because they don't have the Senate or the White House. So it's going to be, you can propose many things, and even from a very crass political math, you can do things everybody loves, like we're going to hand out winning lottery tickets, but nobody's going to budget it through the Senate or the White House. But realistically, I think the Democrats are actually in a pretty good position for 2020 because they can talk, they can get their message out there, they're not in the minority in both houses, and I think last night kind of set a table or even a ramp towards that next election.
Congresswoman, depending on what Robert Mueller's team finds, would you be a favorable vote for impeachment?
Well, I have no idea what he's going to find, but I definitely think we need those results, and we need to see what they say, and then we need to see whether he violated the Constitution and committed an impeachable offense. If he did, then yes, I would. If he didn't, then no, I wouldn't. So, I mean, I just think we have to have the information.
Are you concerned that that would seem, depending on the circumstances, of course, like overreach?
If he committed an impeachable offense and we tried to impeach him, no, that is actually standing up for the Constitution. That is what we swore to do. That's what we swore to do. That was our oath of office. If he committed violations of the Constitution that constitute impeachable offenses, then he should be impeached.
I want to bring in Linda Mapes.
Pramila, now that you're in the majority, what is your absolute first priority? What do you most want to see get done?
I want to see us actually deliver results for working Americans across the country. And there's a number of places. Nothing happens one by one. But I think we have talked about democracy reforms as being one of the first things Democrats would do, try to get corruption out of politics. Number 2, prescription drug pricing. And number 3, infrastructure and jobs. Those are things that the entire Democratic caucus believes in and that we are going to push for. I also am pushing for some resolution on a few critical immigration issues, DACA, TPS, and family separation at the border. I think it is outrageous that we are continuing to separate and rip apart children from their parents. It's un-American and it's inhumane.
Jason, a lot was said about the millennials. They were maligned repeatedly for not voting, but from everything I'm reading, they really did vote. Did they say anything compelling when they voted?
I mean, we'll see. They'll say something compelling if they're consistent, right? I mean, getting someone to go out and vote every once in a while is important, but unless you're doing it consistently, then they're not really saying anything. It says that they're being moved by a specific issue or by a specific person. I think we saw with President Obama, then candidate Obama, he was really inspirational. Hillary Clinton was not as inspirational as he was. Bernie Sanders was a little bit more inspirational in the fact that he wasn't the candidate on the Democratic side. It got a lot of millennials upset and feeling dejected. So, you know, I think we have to focus on ideas. We have to focus on ideas that actually mean something to everybody, including millennials, including older people, including sort of, I don't even know if I'm a millennial. I'm 36. I think I am. But you have to be able to speak to all those people. And I'm technically a millennial. I looked it up. I had to Google it because I like to give millennials a hard time.
And actually, you're right on the cusp because it's 1982.
I am on the cusp. I'm technically a millennial.
2000, and you know,
I'm
millennials at heart.
All right, Marco, you look like you want to say something.
I was just going to say that we make voting really hard in this country. So when we tell a millennial you're not voting, well, they probably have 2 jobs, a bunch of student debt. And I would say the same for many Trump voters that they live in a rural area and have 2 or 3 jobs to keep together as well. I saw in this state, we do a very good job, particularly when we added postage. But I saw pictures of friends in New York and Boston. Oh, I'm so proud I'm voting, and I'm a line of 100 people. And that just looks terrible. That's not a great way to do democracy.
So, quick lightning round here. Any comments on any of our statewide initiatives that any of them blow your mind?
Oh, I
or
love
this
the
is
carbon
exactly
tax failing just because we're finally just putting that to bed. I think this is a rebuke of the Inslee agenda. I think they had a good opportunity to pass something that was maybe revenue neutral that they passed on for this, and that was a mistake.
What about that? Is it time to not have it as a fee? Is there is it time to restructure?
No, wait a
how
second.
we ask
Here's what I
that
want to say
question?
about 1631. $31 million. They know it's a damn good idea, and they wanted to put as much money as possible into killing it and trying to mislead people on the fact that we really need to take on climate change, and we really
You can take it on. You can take it on. I think. What is the conversation about 1639 and the dollars there?
Here's the thing. This coalition was the broadest, most diverse coalition. We had small businesses, we had tribes, we had labor unions. We had a remarkable group that came together to put this forward. And I think that we have done the work to get to the next place where we can have, hopefully, a successful initiative where we can, no, because I think if you put $31 million from fossil fuel companies into defeating this initiative, you know that it's a problem if it passes because it affects your profits when we should be thinking about the future of our planet and passing something on to our children.
But at the same time, Maria Cantwell was overwhelmingly elected. You were overwhelmingly elected. A lot of Democrats got the votes out there.
I didn't have $31 million against me. But.
Okay, we
Marco,
talked about the money part.
Hang on. Do you want to comment on one of the initiatives? You guys.
I'm sorry,
Did you have a thought
sure,
about?
No, I
did
think
any of the initiatives
1639 passed by a lot, which is interesting because a lot of people probably voted for 1639 and against 1631, which is a dichotomy. But it's also 1639 is the result of other gun safety initiatives that have moved forward. And I think you look at a lot of legislation on a continuum, and I think we'll see a carbon tax back in some form retooled.
As a tax, though.
Potentially, yeah.
Keeping it as a tax. The gun measure, as I've been told, is one of the 5 or 6 toughest gun measures in the country.
It is.
Yes, lots of money going into passing that here.
But there's the sound transit rule. I mean, they run sound transit on presidential years for a reason, and that might have been the strategy for the carbon tax.
But also
just
940.
keep running it, in other words.
I just wanted to call out 940 too, which passed overwhelmingly, and how beautiful that is that we're going to have training and de-escalation for law enforcement, but we're also going to be able to hold law enforcement accountable for the deaths of Black and brown folks across the country.
I'm sorry, but 940 is a disaster. 940 was not about training. It could have been about training, but instead this was about making it easier to go after cops. It's about making it easier to prosecute officers in cases where oftentimes the facts of the case come out in favor of the cops, but we're very quick to judge. 940, when you actually talk to officers are saying overwhelmingly they're against this for a reason. It's because they understand, we talk about shared experiences. Shared experiences of a cop is a little bit different than you or me. We don't know what it's like running towards danger. We know what it's like running away from it. 940 is a disaster, and I really wish, because I agree with the general training side of things, even though when you look at the SPD, for example, they're one of the most well-trained police forces in the entire country. They're the gold standard. If you separated that out, I would have likely supported 940.
Go ahead, Sierra.
Marco, let me ask you, the political consultant, about the soda tax initiative, 1634. all of us in the press and in the community encountered people who were confused about that.
Oh, yeah.
There was all this confusion about what did this mean, and do we have a tax, and will it tax groceries or not, and then yes was no, and no was yes.
Yes was against taxes.
And yet, when it all sorted out, it looks like people, it looks like they successfully branded this as about grocery taxes, and people knew which way to vote who didn't want grocery taxes.
They didn't have as much money as a carbon initiative, but they had tens of millions of dollars as well. And they came in to do what they
More than
did.
20
So,
million.
pardon? Was it 20?
More than 20 million.
More than 20 million. So, when you have that much money to play with, you can educate people. And the ads were very targeted. They never talked about soda. It was about no tax on food. And they had I think a cattle rancher in Enumclaw saying, "Please don't tax my beef." And again, from a
Do you think people got it? Do you think people figured out and they knew what they knew?
It's funny. I think of it more as the consultants did polling, they found what worked, and they won, and that was the whole strategy. So I don't think most people knew that towns in Washington State can no longer pass a soda tax. I don't believe people.
They definitely didn't know that. I think that people don't like taxes on groceries, so it was just a good message. Even though I think it was disingenuous, I actually voted against that, not for the same reason. I find the soda tax in Seattle fairly odious, and it seems like it was just about a money grab, which is why they're getting so much money without people stopping drinking the soda. I want the local governments to make that argument. If I don't like the tax, I'll vote yeah.
There are different reasons to vote no on that one.
I heard a vicious rumor that there could be state legislation to allow soda taxes. But anyway, state soda taxes.
Well, if we just fixed our income tax, our regressive state income tax, Joni, then we wouldn't need all these other taxes.
With the election now safely behind us, can we have a more productive conversation between the political tribes? Marco.
I think everybody last night finished, went to bed, and got up for 2020. I really, it just feels that way. Like this was a dress rehearsal which is a dress after 2016. So no, I don't personally see that. I think everybody's marching towards that next election.
We get along.
We get along really well.
We disagree on almost everything, but we get along.
Not everything.
I said almost.
Hold on, the love affair. Let's go, Linda Mabes.
I mean, I have to say, when you say that, my heart just sinks. The idea that we're just going to sit here and bide our time till the next election. There's critical work to do on the environment, on immigration. I mean, people's hearts in your district are breaking over what we're watching on immigration. And I want to know what you are committed to as you go forward on immigration to make something happen within these next 2 years.
Well, as you know, Linda, this has been the issue that I have worked on for 15 years, and I'm one of only 12 members of the entire United States Congress who is an immigrant myself. So it is a deeply critical issue, and I've been playing a leadership role on it, on the family separations. We have a platform that we're putting together. There will be an article that will come out in the New York Review of Books that I'm writing shortly on what that platform should be and how Democrats should stand up and fight for immigrants, for our past, for our present, and for our future. And we should not shy away from embracing that immigrant heritage, that immigrant story. We have a broken system, and I have come to believe, unfortunately, in the last 2 years, that under this president and this Republican Party, they don't want to fix it. It is too valuable of a political football to do anything on it. And it has broken my heart, literally, to sit in Judiciary Committee and have people say things about immigrants, me, and people I know, and most of us and our ancestors, when none of it is true. It is fear-mongering, it is horrific, it is divisive, it is detrimental to this country. And so we will make some small, I believe, we will make some small steps in the right direction with a Democratic House. Nancy Pelosi is a master of strategy. She actually is the one who got the House to pass the DREAM Act. She is the one who got the House to pass the DREAM Act the last time around. And I do believe that she will probably be the next speaker, and I believe that we will be able to move forward some core pieces of immigration legislation. But unless we fix that broken system, we're going to keep having immigrants be political footballs. And in order to do that, I think Democrats are going to have to hold on to the issue strong. If Donald Trump can stand up for white supremacists, and then I got to believe that we as Democrats can stand up for immigrants.
So I'm running out of time here, and I want to ask a question real quickly, and that is, I have this fear.
They want to clap for immigration. I think we have enough.
I can do it. I can do it. For either of you, I have this fear that truth will be lost in many areas of our life, because the president has gotten away with so many lies that it's almost like you can see little kids saying, well, why can't I lie, because I could be president someday.
What are the lies that he's gotten away with? Because I concede, he says things that are false.
Okay,
hold on.
Literally running out of time, and I can't
hold on.
to thousands.
I'm saying we call him out. You call him out, the media calls him out.
I think Marco's going to have to close this. What about a culture of lying, really quickly, because I got to.
That's a different
I think the better answer I'd say is I don't think Donald Trump supporters care. I think David Roberts at Vox wrote a beautiful piece about a year ago that the tribalism, they don't even care if it comes out that he did collusion with Russia. It wouldn't matter because he's implementing what they want to see America be. So the rest of it is sort of along the side of the road as they're journeying.
Okay, we're out of time. We have been chatting about the midterms with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, talk show host Jason Rantz, and Seattle U professor Marco Lowe. Coming back shortly to talk about our beloved orca whales. Thank you. And we are back to check in on the orcas. With us tonight is Stephanie Solien, co-chairwoman of the Governor's Southern Resident Orca Task Force, and Nate Tyler, chairman of the Makah tribe. Before we get started, reporter Linda Mapes has a little treat for us. One summer evening of all the pods gathered together, as I understand it, and communicating. So, thank you for that. Nate Tyler, just to start us off very briefly, most people know what's going on with the orcas, but just like for you, to you, how do you describe to people the plight of the orcas?
I think that's a really good question. Not too long ago, we seen Telequa, the killer whale, carrying her calf for 17 days. There's a reason she was carrying it. She was showing the world that we're out of balance, that the ecosystem is out of balance. And, that made national news. So, we face a lot of problems. The ecosystem faces a lot of problems. There's quite a few things that are playing its role towards what is going on today. And we are one of the pieces of that puzzle, people. This is the fastest growing region. The Seattle region is the fastest growing region in the nation. That's one of the issues. Deregulation's another issue. Pollution, the climate's changing. The Congresswoman, I wish she was still here. She's going to play a role in what we're doing here. The Makah tribe played a role in I-1631, and we believed in that. The President, Fawn Sharp, led that. Tulalip led that, and the Makah tribe played a role in that also. So that's one of the pieces of the puzzle. Trying to address the climate. And at some point, we have to get serious about this, and take bold actions, take bold steps, and I think what is missing is culture. The Makah people have a strong culture. We're tied to the killer whale. We're not the only tribe tied to the killer whale culturally. A number of tribes are, but we're also tied to the salmon. So it's not just killer whales, it's salmon.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Stephanie, the Governor's Task Force is closing in on final recommendations. Can you briefly cite 3 of those that you think would make a real difference?
Well, first, I want to thank Chairman Tyler for his words, because the threats facing the orca are very large, and they do include our growing population and climate. But the task force has been primarily focused on 3 threats that we know we have to address. One is lack of food. They are starving. These are whales who need Chinook salmon to eat. They need a lot of it, and there is no longer enough salmon in our Puget Sound, Sailor Sea ecosystem for them, so we're addressing that. Secondly, vessel noise and interference. Hearing those orca be able to sing their songs, communicate to one another is really important, and it's critical for them to communicate, to find food, and to socialize. And so we've got to quiet the waters around them, so we're looking at vessel noise and interference and what we can do there. And then third, contaminants. Living in this place, everything we do every day, even though we don't mean to, but just driving your car on I-5, not getting your oil fixed, the brake pads, the tire treads that disintegrate, and all of that gets on the road and in our heavy rains becomes a toxic brew that goes into our waterways, and it kills salmon. So the task force's work is about recovering the beloved southern resident orca, but it's also about recovering salmon. And the tribes have been hugely important partners in that and at the table, as a huge group of other stakeholders.
Nate, if you could pick 3 things, I'm sure the list is longer, that we should do pretty quickly to save the orcas and the salmon, because that's part of it.
You know, I think that's a really good question. 3 things that we should do. I'm a commercial fisherman. I've fished my entire life. I grew up fishing. I was taught to fish from a young age, and that's what we do. That's who we're known for, the Makah people. So the 3 things I do, and these are 3 things. These are a number of things we've been asking for decades. For decades, you know, and it's just now coming to the forefront. So hatchery production. And these 3 things, I don't think you can do one and not the other 2, or 2 and not the other 1. I think you got to do all 3. So hatchery productions, get our levels back up based on science, back to the levels of even the 90s, the 1990s. Habitat restoration. Without restoring the habitat, the fish aren't making it there to spawn. So we have to restore the habitat. And the other thing, and people might not like it, but it's predation. You know, sea lions. You know, sea lions are eating about 1.4 million pounds of Chinook salmon a year. 1.4 million pounds.
So what would you do with the sea lions? Remove them?
It's all part of the circle of life. You know, I think it's all part of the circle of life, and if we don't do anything, then we're going to lose 2 species. We're going to lose the killer whale, and we're going to lose Chinook salmon. There's 20-some different runs of Chinook salmon that's coming up into the Puget Sound. A number of them are ESA listed. So if we don't deal with all 3 of them, it's going to be probably a losing battle, but we have to take that bold action now.
Stephanie, are we really going to slap a moratorium, a 3 to 5 year moratorium on whale watching? This came out this week.
Well, first of all, it's not a moratorium on whale watching. What the task force recommended was a suspension of whale watching for all boats on the southern residents specifically. Whale watching
suspension versus moratorium.
Yeah,
what
well, a
does that
suspension for 3 to 5 years. So a moratorium, I think, is a blanket stopping. But what we need to do is take time to quiet the waters, and also, as Chairman Tyler said, increase hatchery production so we can get more fish out into the system. So right now, we're looking at what the whales need. They need quiet waters. They don't need to be harassed, especially when there's several of them now that are pregnant. And we need...
How many are pregnant right now?
Well, Linda may know more than I, but
All right,
three.
Linda knows.
And so I want to really answer this question for you. So we're suspending whale watching for all vessels on southern residents. There are lots of other whales out there. The whale watching community is important to our economy and to tourism. They've actually been very important actors and players to help with the southern residents. And they themselves are trying to do their very best to help the residents. But there are other whales out there. There are the humpbacks. There are the transient orcas that eat the sea lions and eat the
He's down
harbor
for that.
seals.
He's good with that.
So we need to keep some of those harbor seals to feed the orca that do eat them. And we also have minke whales and gray whales, not to mention stellar sea lions and harbor seals that the whale watching boats can take people out and see.
We got people following us on social media and Twitter, and let me follow up because I think this nicely segues with what you just said. This person says, what changes can the task force legally enact to help save the orcas? Or are you guys all just advisory?
Yeah, that's a really important question. We have been sanctioned by the governor to come together, a statewide group of individuals who represent different constituencies, to work with scientists and come up with the best recommendations based in the most current science on what these orca need. And so we've come up with 36 recommendations. And these recommendations deal with how to get them more food, how to deal with vessel traffic and interference, and how to deal with toxins and oil spill prevention.
But now it's...
And they now goes to the governor.
The legislature, whoever.
We're going to send our report to the governor on November 16th. He will then take it and put it into legislative budget policy form and send it on to the legislature. And so there are a number of steps, and as I'm reminded all the time, we still have a lot of work to do. And this is where everybody in the audience that I know cares deeply about this issue, and the thousands of people we've heard from in the public, and not just in our state, but from around the world. We need people to help us as we move these recommendations forward to policymakers to come to Olympia and to let their elected officials know it's important. We have not spent the kind of money and put the targeted focus on not just Sea Orca, but on our overall health of our Puget Sound. And the time has come, we have to do it because we're up against climate change and population growth. Elected officials have big responsibilities. We've got education, we have affordable housing, but we've got to prioritize the environment too, and that's where the orca come in.
Linda Mapes, you are the orca expert.
So, Stephanie, I remember when Tahlequah had just begun her journey, 1,000 miles, 17 days, carrying her calf. You and I spoke. The task force was just getting started, and you said at that time you thought she was speaking to us, just as Chairman Tyler said tonight. I want to know if you feel like you answered her. Here's what I want to know. I want to know what got away in this long process, all the back and forth with the task force, and there's more process to come. What got away? What disappoints you that you did not take on as a task force? And the same question for you, Chairman.
You know, honestly, Linda, I feel that the recommendations we're putting forward are addressing a number of things that we have not done for 20, 50 years. Right now, I feel like we're doing what we can to address the bringing back Chinook on the Columbia River system. We're advocating for increasing more spill on the dams. We're trying to bring stakeholders together to talk about breaching the dams and what's involved with that so we can improve and strengthen that ecosystem. I feel like we're addressing some new issues around noise and vessel interference. We know that if we can quiet the waters around them, they can find more food. That's an immediate benefit to them until we can increase the hatchery production. And then on contaminants, we are looking to address so many infrastructure needs that we have to capture pollution that is destroying our water. So honestly, I feel good about the recommendations. Would I like to have seen 1631 pass and more aggressive action on climate? Do I think we need to do more to manage growth and be sensitive to how we handle habitat? Yes. I mean, I'd welcome, your thoughts, because we're doing the very best that we can with the science we have and really trying to prioritize what these whales need. But we can always do better, and I'm open to learning about that, and we have another year. But I guess my hope is that we can have the public to keep policymakers' feet to the fire, including ours, to just keep pushing forward to get these recommendations passed. That's the most important first step.
Nate, I wanted to ask you, what are the chief differences between some of the tribes and the task force? You work together, but you have some of your own specific concerns.
Right. I think one of the biggest differences is being a tribal leader at the table. I'm not a stakeholder. I'm a sovereign. And being a sovereign, we ceded almost 400,000 acres of forest land for the exact same place we're at today. And through that treaty, that treaty is not only our first line of defense, but it's our last line of defense. And it's not beneficial just to the Makah people, it's beneficial to you guys. I tell people that all the time, and case in point, we can't have a weak link in what we're trying to do here. Yet the Attorney General took the tribes to court over the culverts. That's habitat. That's thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of habitat. So we all got to be all in or not in at all. So when we're at the table, we're there making the recommendations. We're in place ensuring our treaty rights aren't going to get. There's not going to be overreach on what the governor's doing. We will meet with the governor in a government to government. We'll meet with him over the recommendations. As a matter of fact, that's next week, tribal leaders. There's more in play than just the stakeholders, the NGOs, citizens. So we got the federal government, we have NOAA, we have EPA, Bonneville, and even the State Department, U.S. Coast Guard. And that is exactly who needs to be at the table in order for this to be fully functional, to get the results we need, and fix the ecosystem.
Go ahead, CR.
More activity on Twitter here. A couple people are saying if the solution is in part salmon recovery, then quote unquote, what about dam removal?
So that's a good question, because it's one of the recommendations that you're putting off. You're not going to do that right away.
No, I don't
You're thinking
believe
about it.
we're putting it off. I think, first of all, you're talking about an issue that is controlled by the federal government, who's in the White House. And that in itself poses, challenges. Secondly, we have put together the first steps, honestly, of a real, honest conversation with people that will be impacted when those dams are taken down. The people that live on that river and depend on that dam for irrigation, that depend on that dam for transportation of the wheat. And, this is something that has to be talked through, and you have to convene people at a table. We've heard in the earlier panel about this division. Well, we're trying at this task force to bring diverse stakeholders to the table, listen to everyone, and really try to put the orca first, but we also have to listen to people, and they're part of the solution. So what we're doing on the Snake River dams is convening a stakeholder process of people who will be impacted both east of the Cascades, but other players, several of them in this room, the environmental community, but the people themselves. And then the governor will work with Idaho, Idaho and Oregon, and we're going to be looking to bring a third-party person in to help resolve that.
I wonder if in this process you've begun to think that people really get it, the scope of what's going to have to happen. I mean, let's get real here for a minute. The Chinook salmon were listed in 1999. The orca were listed in 2005. Today, there are only 74 of them left. Those 3 pregnancies, if any of them are successful, it'll be the first time, I hate to say this, I'm sorry, the first time in 3 years. 2/3 of the pregnancies in the last 3 years have been lost. So there's really absolutely no time to waste. There are so many deadbeat dams sitting out there. All you got to do is add money and stir to take them down. There's consensus.
Well, on the Snake River?
No. I'm talking about right here in Washington.
And actually, I'm glad you asked that question, because
I'm talking about
in our recommendations, one of the things we are advocating more is funding for more habitat restoration and acquisition. And already lined up, ready, teed up to go are several dams that will benefit Chinook on the Puget Sound. One is the Nooksack Dam.
Right.
And those are in the recommendations to get funding. And I'm optimistic that that will happen. So yes, we're also needing to address the culvert issue. There's a number of things from dams to culverts that are impeding salmon's ability to thrive in these rivers. And they are part of the recommendation. So, we're not afraid of dam breaching. We also need to address the fact they want to build a new dam on the Chehalis.
I'm glad you mentioned it.
So that is something we need to focus on in year 2, but a lot of folks are already working on it now.
I mean, the Howard Hansen Dam has been sitting there without fish passage.
Right.
The Tacoma water diversion, no fish passage since 1911. There's
Right.
50 miles of spawning habitat sitting up there, and it's perfect.
And I so agree and appreciate, and I appreciate you sharing the history. These whales were listed in 2005, and not much happened to address the threats they face. And it wasn't until they started really struggling that we finally had an opportunity and to sit down with the governor and talk about that. I serve on the Puget Sound Partnership. We were supposed to recover Puget Sound by 2020, and we just had to go to the governor and say, we're not going to do it. There's just no way possible because we haven't made the investments. We haven't focused in on the hard work we need to do. If this was easy, it would have been done decades ago. But instead, like a lot of our issues, they kick the can down the road because they're tough, they're expensive, and now this task force has an opportunity to, and we've worked hard over the last 6 months, to really push this issue forward. And so, but we can't do it by ourselves. We need all of you and so many other thousands of people that do care to help us.
Nate, you seemed like you wanted to say something about the dams.
Breaching dams, that's one thing I always thought, was a great idea. The Elwha tribe took down their dams. That took a while for them to get to where they're at today on doing that project. I mean, it was a humongous project. There's so much, it's a different level when it's the tribes, and then when we're talking the Columbia River, we have all these other tribes throughout Oregon and Idaho that's affected also. And it would benefit them, so we're talking, 3 states that need to be involved, not just 3 states, but other tribal leaders that would need to be involved once we get to that point. But to me, I can't imagine, I mean, dams, technology, I mean, we should be, windmills and solar power and, there's absolutely no benefit. I just don't see the benefits of having dams for profit.
Isn't the elephant in the living room here something that you both touched on a little bit, but something that's very hard to do anything about, and that's the growing population. I mean, is it, each of us, we can, as you mentioned, Stephanie, we contribute to runoff, habitat damage. How is it even reasonable to think, with all these people moving to Seattle and to the Puget Sound area, that the best efforts of any of you would make any difference?
Well, you know, there are a number of members of our task force who care a lot about this, and one is the mayor of Shoreline, Will Hall, who's been leading efforts on responsible growth in Shoreline. They've been making some really tough, good decisions. And so what we need to do for year 2, and this is on our list, we're not going to solve it all, but we're going to start some dialogue with mayors, with county executives, as well as the state legislature. But a lot of what needs to happen on growth management has to happen at the local level. And we have people like Dow Constantine and other executives and other mayors who understand that. The difficulty here is everybody wants growth. They want jobs. And that's fine. We need that. The challenge will be, can we be creative? Are we unique enough as a region to be able to have economic opportunity for all, but at the same time build and develop in a way that takes care of this beautiful body of water out here? And that is our challenge. And again, that's where each one of us needs to let our elected officials know we want to live in a place that has given us so much. The new people that are coming, they're loving it here. And you know, we want to welcome people, but we can't continue to grow without addressing the best way in which to grow. So those are going to be issues we look at.
Nate, same question, real tight. I have 30 seconds left. About, is it realistic to think that all these steps we might take could be enough to combat the increase in population that's going to add to the woes?
That's, you know, that's a really tough question to answer. I mean, the numbers I've seen is 356 people a day moving here. I'm not sure if that's accurate or what, but I know the number's pretty high into the Puget Sound region. So I don't know what the answer is besides what was mentioned on, you know, cities and mayors and our state legislature, and there's some laws in place that just need to be enforced also.
Yeah, right.
And I have to leave it right there.
Oh, darn.
Thank you both. The time goes so quickly. We have been discussing the plight of the orcas with Stephanie Solien and Nate Tyler. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Civic Cocktail returns November 28th with Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin on her 1-year anniversary in office. Thanks so much for watching.